Welcome back, everyone. Our next session will tackle digital banking and innovation. According to ArabNet Business Intelligence, GCC banking customers are already heavy users of digital and mobile channels, with UAE and KSA in the lead at approximately 75% adoption each. To get more insights, please help me welcome Matthew Gardner, the founder of Catch London, and his esteemed panelists to the stage. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. Very pleased to be here. I'm Matthew Gardner. I work with banks globally, all the way from China over to the UK. I'm UK-based, not there that often at the moment. Very pleased to be here to learn more about what's happening in Kuwait. I know what's happening in Dubai. So we're going to have a panel now with 3 banking leaders here from Kuwait. Looking forward to learning more and having some questions from the audience too when you feel it's relevant. Okay, so should we just start off with a quick intro of who we are?
Yeah, I am Mohammed Al-Sharif. I am the Chief Strategic Planning Officer of Warba Bank. Thank you. Warba Bank is an Islamic Sharia compliant bank that was the last to enter into the banking industry in Kuwait. We have 12 branches. One of the things that we really embrace is digital. We have done a lot of investment in digital, and we have introduced, I guess, 2 of the most unique partnerships with startups as well as fintech solutions that I will be happy to talk about during the session.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Omar Yassin. I'm heading the retail digital channels for the National Commercial Bank in Saudi Arabia. The National Commercial Bank is one of the biggest banks in the region, not just in Saudi, and we've been placed as the best digital bank in the corporate banking sector as well as in the retail for our innovative solutions, and we're more than happy to share a couple of ones with you today.
Great, so I'm Tariq Mahmood. I'm the Deputy CEO for Ahli United Bank in Kuwait. It's the oldest bank in Kuwait, so we're facing fresh challenges with digital innovation. I've only been in the role for a few months. I've worked in 12 different countries with HSBC and ANZ, but pleased to be here, Matthew.
Great, thank you. So just to start off, really, coming from the UK, I don't know if you're familiar with PSD2, Payment Services Directive 2, that's really kind of turbocharging fintech in Europe, particularly in Britain. It's all around open banking. So that's really driving a lot forward. I know PSD1 was the thing that began fintech, just by liberating data. I'm going to do a presentation shortly, but we have a bank called ClearBank as well in the UK now, which is the 5th clearing bank, runs on Microsoft Azure. So I started working with China because the Chinese regulator, I had the chief engineer of the PBOC come over, wanted to know how we were handling this kind of regulation in Britain. So I see the UK as a driving force here that's really forcing other countries to move forward as well with things like open banking. How are you finding that here in Kuwait? With the kind of external pressures, and also Saudi Arabia, are they forcing your regulator to move more quickly? They're forcing banks to move more quickly?
Yeah, I guess if we look at the global market, if you see the amount of digital banks that has been launched recently, you will find that they are in tremendous and exponential scales. Around 14 digital banks has been launched only in 2017, out of which 3 were in the region. So basically, the regularity has been taking considerable positions and moves in a way of easing up the entrance for those digital banks to come into the market, allowing some new technologies related to digital banking and so forth. In the GCC countries, mainly in Dubai as well as Abu Dhabi and Bahrain, they have worked in two folds, the regulation from one fold, and the other fold is basically creating those sandbox technologies, allowing banks as well as fintechs to participate in a contained environment, exactly, to test their products even prior of launching the laws or the regulations. Moreover, they have been creating hubs for innovation and so forth, allowing all these fintechs and digital banks to participate and test their products accordingly. In Kuwait, in particular, the regularity has been moving in that direction, where the sandbox is supposed to be. They have been talking about creating the sandbox in Kuwait to allow fintechs to come in and test their products accordingly. So basically, in Kuwait, I believe we are in the steps forward into that era.
Okay, and you have quite a strong one here. Because I know Chris Willard, who directs the sandboxes basically in the FCA in London, was talking about a wild, wild west environment with sandboxes just opening all over the world.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've had some regulators say to me, what is a sandbox? And they've actually got one. I won't reveal which country it is. But it sounds like Kuwait's got a much more solid grounding on that. Are you proceeding in a much more methodical way? And again, in Saudi probably as well, any movement really on sandboxing and open data yet?
Yeah, in Saudi Arabia, you could say 2 to 3 years ago, fintechs were not welcome to do anything. A lot of fintechs had ideas, a lot of them had great ideas actually, but they were not given the ground to take it to any further steps. And last year, working with banks and the regulator, we've built a couple of things that open these doors for them. One of them is the sandbox again. 2 is putting a fintech space where we have these virtual offices as well as physical offices for them to come work. We work with them as well in terms of freshen up these ideas further, sculpture them to better fit the financial services. There's a lot happening now on the fintechs. The only thing that the regulations have put together is that these fintechs need to work with the bank so they can be part of this sandbox rather than working alone directly with the regulator. So that's how it goes in Saudi.
It's a really interesting development to hear of actually fintechs going into banks. So coming from the UK, we have a very, very burgeoning scene really of startups from all manner of things for a number of reasons. But also fintech startups, we have many. I think we're on the 3rd cohort now with the FCA with their sandbox. But I've heard people describe it as like going to the zoo, working with fintechs. So it's great going to the zoo, it's great seeing these new animals and everything else, but bringing them home is a different matter. So how do you actually work with a fintech startup when you get inside a bank? How do you deal with compliance? I know Rails Bank are trying to streamline this process, so you don't have a 6-month compliance process for a POC for a fintech. By the time you pass the compliance process, the fintech's probably obsolete or dead because it just doesn't have enough revenue. So really interesting approach to hear of you actually bringing them in from the off. I'd be really interested to hear more about how that's working. Or have you observed anything in Saudi yet with that that can be discussed?
Not really, because at the end of the day, the regulations are very tight as we speak.
Yes.
Seriously, because it's something new and risk. And again, because at the end of the day, if the regulator, which in our case is our Saudi Monetary Agency, will put a rule together, this rule has to go through the law court and a lot of other things. For example, digital signature is one example. So it's not just about opening these doors to fintechs and just move it forward. It's about changing a lot around the ecosystem of the rules and regulations across everything. It's not just that. That's right.
If I can just add,
Please.
So I think the analogy is similar to 130 years ago when everyone was on horses and carriages.
Yes.
And then the car was invented. And it took about 20 years for the car to sort of really take over the market share of the horse and carriage, say in the US. So the same thing with fintech. I think the regulations are going to evolve on sort of know your customer, how to ID somebody using digital tools rather than having to visit a branch or have a face-to-face. But what's I think very exciting right now is that the regulators are talking to each other much more than they used to. So Germany allows a Skype conversation to allow for an identification. of a client. And so that's influenced the UK regulator, who's influenced Australia's regulator. And also when you see the engagement with the central banks in the Middle East, you see they're much more open to innovation. But they want to do it, of course, in a controlled manner that's not going to harm the society or the community as well.
We also have in Dubai the ambition to be on blockchain by 2020, which is quite ambitious, but I guess given the resident population, achievable, I think. So that's also a kind of another step forward. Are you finding here, almost as a third mover, that there are things you can leverage, there are things I've just been in Australia and I've seen them watching the rest of the world and then improving upon it. Are you seeing that here too, that is the regulator open to your opinion on global events in fintech?
Yeah, I'll start and then maybe Mohammed. What I think is driving this place very aggressively is not the regulators, not what other countries are doing, it's the youth.
Yes.
And the young population that's coming through the ranks very quickly, and what they demand as a quality service, as a standard, as a speed, as a user experience is so much different to the previous generations.
Yeah.
So I think that in itself is a huge catalyst that perhaps even the UK doesn't have because of the nature of the population chart in Kuwait is so different. So, and the regulator is responding to that in how they're approaching this sector, because they just see that, you know, the Kuwait user experience has to be as good as what other countries are already delivering.
Okay.
Yeah, just building on this concept, if you think of digital banks or the offering of digital banks in the world as well as in the region, you will find them at either challenger, which is basically a full, complete licensed digital bank who's doing everything digital, or they can find them as a neo banks, which is basically a traditional bank opening a new license that will operate in a digital fashion. Or finally, you will find them like a digital arms, which is basically mobile banking that normal banks are doing in addition to some services. So looking at the regulations, whether they are in Kuwait or outside, you would find that there are some set of regulations that has to be met. One of them, for example, it depends on your choice of where to go of those three options. You have to look at the licensing, the setup of that bank. So basically, the capital is required to establish a bank, if it is a challenging bank versus if it is a neo bank or a digital arm.
What are the capital requirements here at the moment?
It's 75 million KD to establish a bank.
Yeah.
In addition to this, you have to obtain the license of making a banking industry registered in the CBK, Central Bank of Kuwait, and so forth. Add to this, not only there is a startup or setup regulation, there are also regulations around fulfilling the AML, KYC, all of this stuff, like my colleague Omar is saying about the onboarding and all of this stuff. So basically you have to have a systems where you keep untransparent, what you call terms and conditions to the customer. You have to keep the physical copies of the contracts that has been signed to the customer, giving it to the customer and so forth, and you have to respond to the regulation, which I believe can be met whether it's a digital bank or a traditional bank. But the main barriers around it is around the onboarding, the need for a physical verification with the customer. This has to overcome through digital offering.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what we all think is the kind of next best step for the regulator here, or for the industry. What are the key advantages you have from digital banking here already? Obviously, I think it's good for the economy because you have faster transactions, you have more financial inclusion per se. What do you think is good here?
In Kuwait, for example, we have the highest mobile penetration, highest usage of digital media across maybe the globe in terms of Twitter and so forth. If you think, I think if I have read the research around the mobile banking penetration in Kuwait, it's around 30%. Within those people, there is a survey of, will you shift to another bank if it is offering better digital services? 80% said yes, and 80% said, we would like to move completely to a complete digital bank if it is possible.
Okay.
So the desire of the customer is there, and it is fueled by the advanced technology as well as what they are seeing in terms of fintechs and so forth.
And has that got something to do with infrastructure here? Is the banking, obviously it's very adequate, the banking infrastructure, but I just think here it's so hot. If you can avoid, on a basic point really, if you can avoid having to go out to do a basic transaction and queue for however many hours, is that a real driving force, do you think, in terms of consumer adoption, or am I being too simplistic?
Maybe not really, because looking at UAE and Saudi Arabia, the mobile adoption is extremely high.
Yeah.
So it's not about transactions anymore, because, for example, in Saudi, around 95% of transactions are happening actually online. So just 5% are across all these branches that are locked. So it's no longer about just transaction. It's about the things that you need to go to the branch for. It's about the non-financial transactions. It's about onboarding. It's about all of these things that are, unfortunately, you still have to go to the branch for. But today, if any one of us as digital bankers or digital innovators have a mobile application that only has my transfers, my accounts, my cards, we need definitely to look into our digital strategy again, because it's much more than that. It's about, I want to tackle these clients in terms of their shopping, their travel, their dining. So this is how we make a much bigger ecosystem when it comes to banking and financing and digital. It's not just about payments anymore. So our next step is just to go more into that.
Okay.
Just be part of this person, because at the end of the day, Saudi as well and UAE, most of the, I'm not sure about Kuwait, but most of the population are from the youth. So at the end of the day, these guys are not on online banking. These guys are on Facebook, they are on Twitter, they are there. So definitely this is where we need to start leveraging on that and be there in terms of our financial transaction, because today, like Facebook Messenger has, you can do payments through that, especially, and definitely WhatsApp is going to that. So definitely this is our next step towards all of these things, and not just our mobile app and we make it nicer and better experience and stuff. And this is at the end of the day today, like the old days before, if the branch was nice and they offer good coffee, this is where I bank with these guys. But today it's about, do they have a nice banking app? Do they have a nice online
The experience.
application? That's exactly. So they're coming for the experience. They don't care about the bank name anymore. So this is where we have to be in.
Because as very quickly, as WEF pointed out recently, very good research from WEF and Deloitte, they pointed out that Facebook has a banking license in Ireland. Apple now has a cash card.
Sure.
They're beginning to come into this area. When we look at China, which is a bit of a different story, everybody uses WeChat already. A lot of people pay by Alipay. When I'm in Malaysia talking about using card infrastructures, people are saying to me, why are we going to bother with that? We'll just go straight to Alipay, because cards aren't big there. So we know that these tech giants are beginning to move forward as well with their design and their experience. It's very important for consumers.
So I see two trends there. One is from the user experience, is of course we're seeing mobile growth of transactions. You know, for us it's 3 times the level of last year, whereas branch transactions is about the same. But there's multi-channel user experience you've got to keep looking at. But when it comes to the tension around the world, is going to be the regulator and society is going to want to have a stable banking system to avoid financial crisis that's happened every 15 years or so. At the same time, similar to what the tech giants are doing, Amazon and Facebook and Apple, is that layer of user experience. That's going to be, I think, disrupted hugely. And either by the traditional banks adopting a much more interesting user experience, or by partnering with an Apple or a Samsung or Alipay as part of that delivery. But I can see each national government is going to want to protect the stability of its financial industry whilst allowing disruption in certain areas.
And that seems to be the way it's going globally. Again, the WEF report said that fintech's been a bit of a disappointment. We thought that it was going to disrupt the industry entirely. We're going to have these young startups turning everything over. But it's much more about working with banks and open banking more than anything else. That's the general direction of travel. So just going on to China as well, you may know already, but a lot of the bankers there obviously are talking about saying they've lost payments and now they're trying to save savings. So they've lost them to WeChat, Tencent. Interesting thing there though is because it's China, there are now big deals that have gone down, that have been revealed. So every single fintech disruptor has a big deal with a bank. JD.com has a big deal with Baosheng, for example. So it's a bit of a different environment, but they still know they've lost payments, essentially. So I just see a kind of strange dichotomy where banks at the moment have a lot of control over their infrastructure. The regulator supports them, but I wonder if we'll go to a tipping point where suddenly things like payments do begin to be lost to challengers, neobanks. I just see a lot of opportunity here for anybody who's ready to lead the change, including banks.
Actually, in the region here, or mainly in Kuwait, we have not seen that happening a lot.
No.
We are
Nowhere in the world.
Yeah.
It's China, it's happened.
Yeah,
I think.
China maybe because in the panel before us they were talking about it's a closed loop, and that's all about it.
And financial inclusion as well in
Yeah.
China. A lot of people were financially excluded, and suddenly they came online. Yuebao has now got 165 billion under management. That's Yuebao means spare change, and that's money that was lying around offline before.
Yeah.
So that's extraordinary. But what's happening in Kuwait in
See,
parallel?
in particular, I always say it, you have to work smarter rather than harder. The fintech across the world is booming. There is $17 billion, I guess, spent in the last year only on fintechs. And the majority of those fintechs were basically banking products specifics related to lending, personal finance, payment, wealth management, and so forth. So there is a wide variety of options for banks to pick and choose from those fintechs the way they fit into their organization in a way that satisfies the customer experience from one fold, the regularity from the other fold, as well as the overall business process. In Kuwait in particular, I will speak about our bank, we have tied up with two not major fintechs, but one of them was part of the success stories that has been presented at the beginning of this today's session, which is basically Ajar Online.
Okay.
This Ajar Online is Kuwaiti entrepreneurs who set up a complete platform that helps the payments from the rentee, from the owner of the property and the rentee. We have a partnership with them where we provided them the operational mechanism for making sure that their transaction flow seamlessly and in a way that is convenient for both parties of the equation. And basically, this is where the bank has not lost a payment that goes outside, for example. Instead, we partnership with them, and maybe we are sharing revenues and so forth. The other tie-up or partnership that we have done, which is around, again, fintech banking collaboration, was with one of the previous panelists, which is the OG, One Global Money, where we created the first wallet in Kuwait, which is called the W Wallet, allowing a stored value account concept, allowing a closed loop kind of environment of payments. Okay. So basically, this is how I see banking should work with fintech, rather than doing it themselves, maybe working smarter, pick and choose from those, the way that it fits the business model that you are working in.
That's really interesting because you avoid duplication. So in the UK, we have a lot of duplication. If I take a fintech into a bank, which sometimes I do, I end up working with 5 or 6 different silos within the bank. I know Combank in Australia have kind of solved that. They've got an on-prem system where if you want to work with a fintech, they'll deal with everything for you. They'll deal with all the internal regulation. But it sounds like you're avoiding duplication here because you've got a much more direct relationship with fintechs. That's a really promising development, which I think the rest of the world should be looking at.
From our side in Saudi, our bank, which is the National Commercial Bank, we're working already with 2 international fintechs, and we have funded and working with a national or a local fintech. So it's there, it's happening. Okay. But again, regulated with our bank, not just a standalone thing. And we're doing a lot of these incubators in terms of inviting fintechs and see what they have and even funding them if we love the idea and just move it forward. So we're doing a lot of these activities today because we believe it's extremely hard for us to do it on our own through our systems and through our IT, and we're a big bank, there's no way we can move this way. And that's how it is from our side.
So I see two comments. One is on the competitors for the future. Like Alipay and others are definitely going to be different to the competitors of today. So if we're pitching to do the cash management for a large corporate in the Middle East, our traditional competitors are banks. But I think going forward, you'll have different platforms we'll have to compete with who have different payments infrastructure. So I do think there's a threat there that we need to make sure we're on top of. When it comes to partnering with fintechs, I think always to make sure that you're not wasting time of the fintech or yourself, you've got to see what problem are you looking to solve as well, either for the client or internally. Yeah. And then what solutions are going to help you make that experience or solve that problem. I think many banks, and I've seen many incubators around the world, they try and partner with 20, 30 fintechs. Yeah. And it disappoints the fintech startup entrepreneur because they're not getting the attention they need. And the bank's leadership team also gets disenchanted. So I think you've got to be very focused when you enter into that kind of partnership.
Yeah, big observation of mine. A lot of people I work with in London as well. There's a lot of fatigue now around this kind of fintech mania. Bear in mind that 6%, certainly in EMEA, 6% of bank executives are technologically fluent. So if they're excluded from the process, it doesn't go anywhere. You just kind of have this vanity project of something that looks like it's going really well. What I'm finding interesting now is, of course, the two big words. One, blockchain is a bit old. The second, AI, again, it's bigger than just one little two letters. But as they move into the space now, as we see things like JPM taking 30,000 hours of lawyers' time down to 3 seconds, we begin to see, again, NAB in Australia very frank about opportunities for banking staff. They have to retrain, reskill. Accenture say they've moved 17,000 people. We now see this pressure almost on the balance sheet as automation moves in to the equation, and we see a much bigger need for utility. And this is what I'm seeing here, though, is you already have this utility, you have a much more direct relationship with fintechs. So it would be easier for you to get some profit out and hit the bottom line.
Yeah. I think what could possibly need to change in banks in Kuwait or elsewhere would be also when you look at the leadership teams and even the board members, is many of them have got banking and finance experience without the technology aspects. What I'm seeing in many banks around the world, they're beginning to put people with technology backgrounds as part of it, and they're defining themselves more as technology companies rather than as banks.
Yes.
It seems to be the case.
This is actually a very interesting point that you have raised about the change and the buy-in of the top management into the journey. Usually, when you set a strategy, it is the point that will take you from X to Y. If you set a digital platform, for example, or digital transformation, it will take you from this point to the other point. It is the culture itself which will drive you to go to that point. So if the culture is not ready or not embracing or not inheriting these innovations and these digital aspects, you will not be able to reach to your point. No. And as they say, the culture will eat the strategy for a breakfast in that case.
Yeah, easily. If people aren't incentivized, again, looking at silos across everywhere really, I do some work around medtech, and it's very interesting because it's a much more of a problem space. Things need to be solved there, so it begins to happen. Again, with blockchain in China, I see things happening because there is a problem with many payment systems, people who are financially excluded. Blockchain, of course, we have this problem with interoperability, settlement. It's a great idea. You know, we're bankers, we think, great, we've got spreadsheets and ledgers. It's numbers, we can do it. But when we come to settlement, obviously, blockchain isn't working yet. But in China, I see a lot of innovation around that happening really, really quickly. So I think a lot of room for movement.
There is, yeah, that's right. I think after the financial crisis, banking became an industry that I had a few concerns whether I still wanted to be part of it, to be honest, because you just felt the regulator was going to suffocate the whole industry. But when you see the rise of fintech, especially in the last 3 years, you've been involved for 5 years, I think it's just a very exciting space. And so I think for the next 5 or 10 years, the innovation that will happen in this space will be great for the client, but also exciting for those that work in the industry as well.
Yes. And any advances on AI here? Anything?
AI, not really, but a lot of branches now are moving to more digital kind of branches.
Yes.
So more on the self-service, interactive machines, and these kind of stuff. But AI, to talk, like, again, AI could be a lot of things. Could be robotics, could be AI, it could be a lot. But from our side, it's just around self-servicing branches. So it's not about, because digital is no longer about less branches or closing down branches. It's actually moving the branch to be more of, you could say, the tellers to sellers, and just moving these branches to more, if the client comes in, he can be served on his own. But in terms of AI, not much is happening across. But again, we're more than happy to explore these things moving forward. Yes. That's about it, because at the end of the day, even if we come up with the best AI stuff, again, regulation will look at it in a different way. So we're stuck in the middle of innovation versus how fast can we do it, and versus regulators if we could do it. So,
I'm seeing a lot more pre-competitive behaviors, really, even between regulators, between nation states, I think. as they realize that you need to move quickly to work with this tech. And just going on, I guess to round up, we've been talking for a while now, on the culture piece. I know DBS in Singapore did particularly well with their digibank, so they went to India. Obviously, they've leveraged Aadhaar, which is the Indian eKYC system. About 80% of Indians now have eKYC with a thumbprint. They leveraged that and enabled you to get a bank account immediately by putting your thumbprint down. Quite a big piece. And they use strategy all over that bank. The whole bank really was a digital bank. I know now Neil Cross is on leave, and Olivia Questman has gone to CIMB to do the same thing. But it's moving technologists. Neil Cross was CIO of the Year, awarded by Steve Wozniak, nonetheless, in 2015. He was on the board of DBS. Now Questman has gone to CIMB, a technologist more so than anything else, moving onto the board. I think that's a really important step, to have somebody there who really gets it and has actually got a real say. Yeah.
It is. It's really important and great. I've seen DBS very closely. I think the thing that we always got to be aware of is you put these figureheads in the position, but you've really got to understand also DBS is a very deep organization.
Yes.
And making change happen across all levels is the challenge that most banks face. And so I think getting the appointments right is the start of the journey. But really feeding through to the DBS experience in their different markets is where the rubber will hit the road.
Absolutely.
On the impact it has, yeah.
I'm really iterating upon that. They were very brave, they did it first, but I think we can observe from that now. And again, with silos, very much about shared value. So, and another thing, the ex-CTO of Australia talks a lot about collaboration and kumbaya and everything being nice. Competition is not always a bad thing either within an organization. Quite good to stimulate some competition between different departments. If you all know you're working towards the same goal, it's good to perhaps have competitive bids on any particular project you have. And also he recommended having senior leaders who had nothing to lose, who actually leave in the organization, who wanted to make change, being able to speak out quite openly. I think that's important to have in the mix as well.
It is. I think the cultural piece is the key for that kind of innovation to happen inside the companies and accept that tension on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, really. I mean, there's no shortage of technology. The problem is there's too many technological solutions out there at the moment, I think. Too many which are similar. So I think the challenge is to know really what you want, what you're looking for, and how you're going to implement that across the bank.
I think you're right. If we respond to every proposal that comes to us from a technology company, I mean, we'd get nothing done. So I think we've got to, each of our banks, we've got to be very clear on what problem we're trying to solve. And then know what tools you need to bring to the table to make that happen.
Absolutely. And looking at the US, which is a much more fragmented environment, money transmission occurs as soon as you go from state to state. We see plug and play there in the Valley, big startups, big multiples, so well organized, plug and play, kind of get 5 together and then go to a bank and say, which one do you want? Different environment because it's so much more slow moving, but something to learn from US as well. I wonder how quickly the US will move. We have the payments kind of council almost set up, industry body with PayPal, Intuit, Facebook, everyone's on it, trying to get everybody to move more quickly on blockchain. But we still see the US lagging behind. They're still using checks, for example.
It'll take some time.
Any thoughts on how Kuwait and Saudi can lead in fintech? Kind of to sum up, where do you think you could really show the world what to do properly, how you can get more profit out of?
I think in Kuwait, actually, we have one of the things that has been done very well recently, which is basically from the Public Authority of Civil Information. They have enabled the e-signature, or the digital signature, allowing you to have your civil ID, where you can put a certificate on the chip itself, enabling you to be verified in any terminal that accepts or integrates the digital signature. This is by itself, maybe to your point earlier, where a fingerprint can do the account opening. Your civil ID today in Kuwait can do all of this for you
Okay.
if you are integrated with PASI in one way or another, allowing hopefully the onboarding journey to take maybe less than a minute.
Right.
But still, till today, there are friction in the process where you have to go by yourself to register for the civil ID and to get that particular digital signature. So it's not yet seamless to the customer to obtain it in a simple way. So basically, we simplify it from one end and a little bit complicated to him from the other end.
Okay.
So basically, this is what I see the big advantage in Kuwait that can be leveraged for digital banking and seamless payments and seamless transactions, hopefully.
ID. All about ID, right?
Yeah.
IDs are kind of hopeless at the moment, I think.
In Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia, I'm sure most of us heard about the vision of 2030. It's a major transformation vision for Saudi Arabia moving forward. One of the main pillars of that is digital. Digital in many ways. Digital in our government, which is by today pretty well. Digital by opening a lot of these SMEs and putting them into the digital world. So we're doing a lot in that with the government. So the pace of change when it comes to regulatory changes, opening up to the world more, this is happening very rapidly lately. And we expect for the next 5 years a lot of changes. So if we meet again in 5 years, definitely there's a massive change in what we say today versus what we're going to say at that point of time. So there's a lot of changes moving forward.
So very unified strategy, really. I know in Dubai, I've seen here too, e-passport gates. Again, in Australia, that kind of thing. We're looking at autonomous vehicles, electric cars, changes in commodity prices as a result of that. All kinds of things, but it sounds like you have a very unified strategy in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. And the structure there is, I know we could, like everyone will say Dubai and United Emirates, and we could do a lot like them, but our change needed to be from the basis. So this is where the vision came in. It's like we need to change the whole infrastructure, the whole ecosystem, the whole government. Everything has to change from the beginning. Otherwise, it will not happen. Bits here and there, it's not going to happen. So that's why this transformation goes in a lot of things. Yeah. And we will expect a lot of things because for one example is opening a bank in Saudi is an impossible thing to do. Now we can see that new licenses are coming much easier. The big banks are opening a digibank kind of thing. So there's a lot of happening moving forward, and we expect to see much more than that.
Okay, that's impressive, the unified approach. They say if you can't answer the phones, don't start digital transformation.
Yeah.
If you can't solve the root problem, don't try and move on and automate it because you'll get another problem essentially. But I'll certainly be looking towards Saudi now to see how that's been done because I see many other jurisdictions not having such a coordinated approach to this.
So I'm optimistic about the change in Kuwait for 3 reasons. One is the youth of the population, as I said earlier. I think that's going to force us to keep on our toes and innovating. 2 is the actual pride that the country has in wanting to be a leader in this space, and already the engagement between the regulator and the banks is very active. And then finally, I just think, looking at the size of the country, you can actually facilitate change very quickly.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the UK, 60 million people or something, in the US, the federal structure, the states, etc., it's very difficult. That's why checks are still there.
Yeah.
But I think Kuwait is such a manageable economy that once you get your energy behind an initiative and there's traction, it can spread very quickly.
Wow. Kind of the opposite of China in a way, which is incredibly dynamic. The same number of people in Shanghai as there are in Australia. And in the UK, we have 12 million people, apparently with less than £500 in savings. We have all these big things to negotiate, but you have, again, a very clear population who you can work with very, very easily. Oh, well, look forward to watching and pointing out, as I go around the world, pointing out what you're doing here, keeping up with you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Should we have, I guess we have networking questions later on. Yeah, okay, great. Anybody have any questions in the audience for us? Any question is good, I would say, around fintech. Don't worry about lack of knowledge, just think about what you want to know.
Hello? Hi. Hi, I just had a question about the blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies in general, like Bitcoin and Ethereum and smart contracts and all that. Is there any thoughts on that, and how do you feel about it as banks adopting this technology?
Well, I know, just to kick off from a kind of global perspective, UBS just started up with 4 banks a kind of cryptocurrency for banks. Bank of England prepared some papers on cryptocurrencies. A lot happening in China. I know Australia is thinking about it quite seriously because they're thinking, what if China gets a national cryptocurrency? So from a national level, from a central bank level, there's a lot of activity there. Every central bank I work with is looking at it. Around Bitcoin, Ethereum, that's a whole other ballgame, I guess. There's a lot, it's a very, very busy scene. We know about the Bitcoin price at the moment.
Yeah, in Kuwait in particular, I don't think there is the talk about Bitcoins or whatever, but central bank is considering seriously for the digital currency. And this is, I guess, in similar fashion of all other central banks in the region. For example, Dubai or Emirates recently have announced their digital currency and so forth. This is, I guess, where it will be contained, and again, banking sector will still play a role in that particular field, rather than completely losing it to the Bitcoin and so forth.
Yes. And again, China tried to control Bitcoin, and it keeps backfiring, I would say. Every time it tries to clamp down on it, it becomes more popular in some way or another. Even though exchanges have been closed recently, the ICO piece has hit a lot of Chinese businesses very hard, but it hasn't killed them yet. So central banks taking a more proactive role, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very important sort of evolution we've got to stay close to. Where it's impacting banks right now is mostly through blockchain settlements in foreign exchange markets, etc. But it hasn't really translated through the industry. Yeah, we've got to stay close to it. But I haven't seen it take off wildly, and there's still cynics and people that are fanatical about it. But I think that the important thing as a leader in a bank is to be very close to what innovation is happening in that space.
Anything on central bank cryptocurrency, Bitcoin? Not really.
No. Nothing.
No.
A lot of people talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's the new hype, but nothing more than that.
No. There's a lot of peripheral activity, I would say. And certainly on the ICO space, very busy because on paper, a lot of people are very rich at the moment. They've got a lot of excess capital, which has come from this surge in valuation. Any other questions? I think time's over, yes. Right. Okay. Well, I guess there's no doubt that this whole fintech scene movement will continue to evolve and the banks will move with it. So I'm sure there'll be a good opportunity to discuss this at the next ArabNet, I would say.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.